Hello. Over the past year or so, the world has seen many challenges exacerbated by, among other things, accelerating change, disruptive technology, and the different approaches taken by countries to survive the devastating effects of the pandemic. Considering this, South Africa is now eagerly anticipating the launch of the IRMSA 2023 South Africa Risk Report, which has become an influential must-read for key decision makers in the country. The report is going to build on IRMSA's role as a catalyst for positive change in South Africa and is reflected by our theme for 2023, one word, limitless. I'm joined today by Bonang Mohale, President of Business Unity South Africa. Bonang, a very warm welcome to you. First of all, let's start with this, a broad question if we can. How has the local and global risk landscape and outlook changed over the past 12 months or so? It seems to change every day, doesn't it?
You're absolutely correct, Jeremy, my dear brother. So maybe if I were to start with what are we seeing globally? First, I think it's this notion of an unprovoked, unwarranted, and therefore unjustified Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Number two is the pandemic, because it's still with us. Now we are talking about the XBB 1.5 Omicron subvariant. The third, of course, is the issue of climate change. But I think what we have also seen is the fact that precisely because of the pandemic, amongst others, now the world, especially the biggest economy in the world, US of A, the EU, the 27 members, but also the UK in particular, but also China, which used to be the third biggest, now the second biggest economy in the world, they are now experiencing double-digit inflation. So inflation has really come to the fore. The last one is this issue of the supply chain disruptions because of shortages of chips, but also because of the route that these goods take. South Africa, for instance, orders most of its goods from China. That ship normally fills up, goes to the US of A, where there's about 300 million people, and then it offloads what they need and comes to us. On no more than 6 occasions, that ship goes to the USA, they take everything. And then South Africa has to wait. So if you are involved in a motor car accident, it's not unusual for you to wait for parts for up to 6 months. So really that's on the global front. Let me end, Jeremy, by saying this has now precipitated, of course, an energy crisis that is driven by the price of energy itself, but also because the world has not figured out how to replace the almost 25% of integrated energy. I'm talking about petroleum, but also gas that comes from Russia. But also we have seen it driven also by the food prices. I mean, Ukraine is half the size of South Africa, but it exports grains, especially wheat, to 28 African countries, in spite of the fact that Africa has 60% of the arable land of the world. Let me rush very quickly to what is keeping awake at night in South Africa. So we have 1,001 challenges, often with conflicting priorities. If you look at the top 10, in the interest of time, let me just mention 4 of those. Number 1 on that list has to be state capture because of its quantum. I mean, in 5 years, we stole 1.5 trillion South African rands. That's 2/3 of what poor Edward Kitzvetter collects from businesses and individuals in a year. The second is this notion of youth unemployment at 74.9%, when young people of military age are sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. Not only are we asking for trouble, but we are actively inviting it. The third, for me, it's this notion of a stable, reliable, and predictable energy supply. Not just our obsession with Eskom, and we should take it from whence it comes. So if you look at 2022, this economy has lost 560 billion because of load shedding. This load shedding that started in February 2008, in 15 years, we've been unable to solve it. But we are now seeing, just in 2022, 6,400 gigawatt hours of unserved energy at 85 rand per kilowatt. That's how you come to 560 billion rand that has been lost to the economy. But the real loss, I suppose, is whenever we reach stage 6, it's a minimum of 4 billion rand a day, every day. Between stages, it's 500 million. So it wipes off an entire 1 percentage point from the GDP of this country. Considering that in 10 years, this economy has not grown by more than 2 percentage points, half of that is wiped off, decimated by load shedding. I'm not talking about big companies like Netcare. Richard Friedlander released Netcare's results that they spent 530 million rand just on diesel. They are excluding the capital cost of buying these generators. If you and I, Jeremy, were to buy a Cummins generator, that's probably 43 kVA, 125 liter capacity. We're talking about 380,000. At 20 rand a liter per diesel, you can see that for big companies, it reduces their profits. For small and medium enterprises, it pushes them into liquidation. The last one, I think, is our inability, our unwillingness, our lack of know-how to implement the structural economic reforms. Jeremy, let me just end by saying, South Africa has now become and holds the world records for all the wrong reasons. I mean, we are the world's most unequal society, having taken over from Brazil with a Gini coefficient of 0.63. We now have the highest unemployment rate in the world. With an expanded definition, we're talking about almost 40%. We have the highest SME failure rate in the world, the highest GBV rate in the world, not by a factor of 2, 5 times the global average. But also we second only to Russia in terms of suicide. And it was only yesterday, as I end, Jeremy, that we received the West G20 country from the G20 research group report. I'm hoping that sketches the picture that we are indeed in a big hole and our job is to stop digging. Jeremy?
So the risk quotient, both globally and locally, is very high, Bonang Mohale. How then do risk managers need to start recalibrating the way they think? How do they need to change the way that they practice and also advise boards of directors?
Absolutely. So let me start first with how it manifests. I spoke about the fact that inequality is widening. Racism is at an all-time high. Black graduates are roaming the streets hopelessly. Public education has collapsed. Public health care continue to fail the poor and the vulnerable. Crucial infrastructure is laying in decay, and lawlessness has now become an epidemic. If I were to pick maybe 3 or 4 things that we must do to address this issue, number 1, we have to root out and defeat state capture. Because it doesn't matter what you do, until and unless we address that, it's like really a drop in the bucket. Number 2, I think we need to turn every government building to address the energy crisis. Every government building, every head office of every corporation, every factory, every school, every service station into a solar energy panel mecca. If we did that, we will reduce probably our over-reliance on Eskom by a factor of about 30 percentage points. I mean, when you look at Africa, it probably has more than 300 days of pure sunshine. and yet we're not the world authorities on solar energy, but Germany is, with almost only 3 months of sunshine. Number 3 on that list, I think, Jeremy, we need to address the stubbornly high levels of unemployment, which then lead to increasing levels of poverty and increasing levels of inequality. One problem, not 3 problems. It's the high levels of unemployment, so that our people can have their self-respect and indeed their self-worth. Lastly, I think we need to take this notion of education seriously. I mean, when has 30% become an acceptable pass mark? We have about 1.2 million young people that go to school. Half of them fall off before they get to grade 12. A majority of them don't even make it to institutions of higher learning. A lot of them are unemployable. At any point in time, we have an injection of about 380,000 young graduates that enter the job market, often with inappropriate skills. If we don't address this, my submission is that the 2 weeks in July of a failed insurrection is going to happen again and again and again. Because at the heart of it, Jeremy, is the infrastructure collapse. We talk about energy, but water is now collapsing. In fact, if you think about it, we had water shedding when the Val water system was at 85% capacity, which points to probably only 2 reasons why we are in trouble. Number 1 is, of course, poor governance. Number 2 is decaying infrastructure. But fuel itself, there's a shortage. Most aircrafts, most airlines would go to OR Tambo International Airport 3 hours earlier to go and fill up at King Ushaka International Airport. I think the next ESCOM is going to be Transnet, where just the Durban port is probably the 3rd from the bottom. And that's really the backbone of how goods move, mostly from the coast to inland, where Gauteng is 30% of the national GDP, followed by KwaZulu-Natal at 16% and the Western Cape at 14%. And KZN is doing everything in its power to shift that growth into the Western Cape, and we saw it with tourism when the beaches in KwaZulu-Natal were spewing with sewage. And most of the people that had booked redirected to the Western Cape, in spite of the fact that they themselves had to close 6 of their own beaches because of raw sewage. Because you see, you need electricity to be able to effectively deal with the water treatment. When you don't have electricity, towns like Benoni just don't have water. Jeremy, back to you.
Bonang Mohale, in conclusion then, ahead of the release of IRMSA's 2023 risk report, in your opinion, how valuable, how important is this document, and how should risk managers then be using it?
Number 1, what gives us a sense of comfort as a board at any point in time is the 4 things. 1, of course, it's risk management, absolutely number 1. It's compliance. The 3rd, it's this notion of probably dealing with combined assurance. And then lastly, of course, it's actuarial, the reports that we get from people that try and anticipate how the next 2-3 years is going to be like. So understanding risk and its management, it's not about trying to predict the future. It's about the level of preparedness. It's about exercising the mental muscle to ensure that when we are hit with something that you didn't anticipate, like we are blindsided by the pandemic, like we were hit with the 2 weeks in July, like we were hit by the floods in KwaZulu-Natal during Easter, and again 2.0 during May, that you have gone through a process, you've got a system of dealing, of anticipating, of responding. Because in exactly the same way as I conclude, Jeremy, as in reputation management or in crisis management, we always try and remember the people involved. Number 2, we try and tell the truth, nothing else but the truth, and we tell it quickly. So the companies that have on their fingertips the 3-4 things that are likely to blindside them are likely to deal with an unpredictable, uncertain future than those that didn't even think about these issues. Jeremy.
Bonang Mohale, President of Business Unity South Africa, as always, your insights are both valued and respected. Thank you very much.
I'm touched, humbled, and honored. Thank you, my dear brother.